iconic. The Economy of Certainty, an introduction to the Typology of Islamic legal theory by Aron Zysow, Harvard University, 1984, Cambridge, Massachusetts. The main argument attributed to Ash-Shafi'i is that an explicit isnad is necessary in order that the recipient of the tradition, a sami', the one who hears the tradition, be in a position to conduct his own inquiry into the probity of the reporters. In a continuous tradition, where there has been no explicit approbation by the reporter, the recipient will not accept the tradition until he himself is convinced of the probity of the reporters. Rejection is all the more necessary where not only the character of the reporters, but their very identity is unknown. This personal inquiry is called for because the grounds of disapprobation, jarh, literally injuring, jarh, may be concealed. The tendency is only too great to rely on externals. We cannot assume an implied guarantee of probity in the act of reporting, since there are many cases of reliable authorities, thiqat, reporting both continuous and discontinuous traditions from informants who were not acceptable. In reply, Samarkandi claims that irsal was a common practice among the companions, and one that took place without opposition. This acceptance constitutes a kind of consensus as to the legitimacy of the practice. We are entitled to posit an implicit guarantee of probity in the act of reporting because it is inconceivable that the mursil, himself a reliable authority, would impose a new legal rule upon his hearers without being prepared to vouch for the quality of his informants. The enormity of the offence of attributing to the Prophet something he did not say would be deterrent enough. Having made his case for an implicit approbation in the mursal, Samarkandi insists that this approbation is sufficient and no personal inquiry is called for. This principle, he claims, is also accepted by Shafi'i, for he too, like the Hanafis, accepts a general approbation without the mention of specific grounds. Thus, a Shafi'i also reaches a point at which personal probity is all that is demanded for a valid approbation. Where a Shafi'i does differ in his demand that disapprobation be for a specific ground, the Hanafis reject a specific disapprobation. Apparently, they regarded it as an invitation to character assassination. Indeed, such was often the case with the Hanafis themselves, frequent victims. Thus, according to Samarkandi, it is enough to say that a reporter is mastur, that is, unknown moral standing, or in some other oblique way indicate that he is unacceptable. In Samarkandi's defense of the mursal, we find the antithesis of what, after Ash-Shafi, had come to be the position of Ahl al-Hadith. For Samarkandi says nothing less than the isnad is unnecessary. Once he has ascertained the fact of approbation on the main part of probity, the hearer is relieved of making a personal inquiry into the subject of the approbation. He must accept the approbation at face value. This position is one of extreme subjectivity when contrasted with that of the muhaddith, who saw the isnad as a whole to be tested in all places for weaknesses. His goal, by applying the most stringent standards to eliminate whatever was at all suspect, and thus to come into possession of the corpus of the Prophet's utterances from the traditions which survived such minute scrutiny, were regarded as of certain authenticity. Samarkandi, as we have noted, presents his position as that of the Hanafis at large, and where Shafi'i sources also consider it, it is in fact the situation was not so simple. Samarkandi, as we have noted, presents his position as that of the Hanafis at large, and there are Shafi'i sources which so consider it. In fact, the situation is not at all as simple. The doctrine of Isa ibn Abban, which he merely notes in passing, and the closely related doctrines of Jassas, which he does not refer to at all, had found important adherents amongst the Central Asians. The dispute centered about Marasil after the third generation. Ibn Abban accepted only that which had won the approval of great scholars. Jassas considered them to be a presumption of unsoundness until proof to the contrary. Thus, Jassas's position was the most reserved to the mursal. It differs from that of Ibn Abban in another point as well. Ibn Abban is said to have regarded the mursal as of greater validity than the musnad. The fact that the mursil, the one who is doing the irsal, took all responsibility for the authenticity of the hadith upon himself was a clear indication of the special confidence he placed in it. This preference of the mursal is supported by reference to the early practice of irsal, when the authenticity of the hadith was attested to by numerous reporters. The names of the reporters were omitted precisely because they were so many. The preferences of the mursal to the musnad also had the advantage of forestalling the objection of those hadith scholars who justifiably asked what point there was in having an isnad if mursal was as good as musnad. Ibn Abban, a former follower of the traditionists, would have been sensitive to this objection. His answer that the mursal was in fact more valid than the musnad would have been more persuasive than the answer sometimes found, that the occupation of the hadith scholars with isnad was an avocation of theirs, and no more impugned the mursal than did the collection of varied isnads impugning the tradition with a single isnad. At the same time, however, Isa's claim for the superiority of the mursal could only apply to those traditions which the personal authority of the mursil would be of significance, in the case of the first three generations and thereafter of great scholars. Al-Jassas's position rests upon the technical probity of the mursil, as is that of al-Karhi, but more a specific quality, that of abstaining from transmitting the hadith of unreliable authorities. This quality is presumed in the early period, its opposite thereafter. It thus grants the point of the opposing camp that simple probity is not enough among the later Hanafis. However, even those who reject Karhi's position that the mursal is always acceptable based upon the implied approbation of the omitted informants on the probity of the reporter. Unlike Samarkandi, who follows al-Karhi completely, they accept the rationale of probity, but rather inconsistently restrict its application. Samarkandi's contrast to the Hanafis and Shafi'i positions on the acceptability of non-specific disapprobation calls for some comment. The Hanafi teaching on the issue Samarkandi presents corresponds to his liberal doctrine on the mursal. The word of the single man of probity is enough to guarantee his mursal and to admit or disqualify another report. In those Hanafi sources, however, which take a more reserved view of the mursal, the only position reported is that which corresponds to Shafi'i. It would be rash to conclude that Samarkandi has erred or fabricated a new position for the Hanafis. The Shafi'i Abu Ishaq al-Shirazi, who dies in 476, commensurate with 1083, quotes Abu Hanifa to the effect that the branding of a reporter as a wrongdoer, fasiq, without explanation suffices for disapprobation. We may thus take it that Karhi's position on the mursal had its counterpart in respect to the disapprobation, and that these views were widely held for them to be seen by some Shafi'is as the standard Hanafi doctrines. Stay tuned for many more parts.